Hello everyone, welcome back. Today we are going to be doing chemistry, IGCSE paper 2 multiple choice. This is the May-June 2023 series, so this is the most recent one that Cambridge has released. I believe it was released 2 to 3 days ago. And I've heard that many people found chemistry this year to be particularly hard. Well, let's see. Let's try to do this. Come on. Question number 1. 4 physical changes of ethanol are listed. In which changes do particles move further apart? Well, we know that particles move further apart if they are turned from solid to liquid and liquid to gas. So it have to go in this order and not the reverse order from gas to liquid or liquid to solid. So we have to go in this order. So when solids particle, we know the solid particles are very tightly packed with each other, and when in their liquid form they move a little bit slightly apart. However, there are still some attractions. However, in gas, the particles are the furthest apart from each other, so they move further apart than liquid. So we have to go solid to liquid. This is called melting. Liquid to gas, this is evaporation. Okay, so now we have seen that there's condensation. Condensation is from gas to solid, and this is not possible because condensation, remember, condensation is actually from gas to liquid, so the particles will actually move closer together. Evaporation is one of the correct ones listed because evaporation means that the liquid is going from liquid to gas, and therefore the particles will move further away. So 2 is the correct option. Number 3, freezing. Freezing is from liquid to solid, so in which the particles will come closer together, so it's not a possible one as well. Boiling is also from liquid to gas, so it is also possible. So 2 and 4 are the correct answers. Okay, moving on to question number 2. An atom of element X has 5 protons, 6 neutrons, and 5 electrons. Now, whenever you see a list given, I would like to change it to the isotopic form. And what do I mean by this? Although they haven't given you the element, we can just write the element as X, right? So we know we have to write it in the isotopic form, so the proton number is usually written in the down, and the neutrons and protons together make up the mass number. So this is going to be 5 to 6 is 11. So we know that an atom of element X has 11 mass number and 5 protons and 5 electrons. Now we just have to choose the correct statement. So X has an atomic number of 6. Now this is wrong because remember, atomic number is the same as proton number. So it says there are 5 protons, but this statement is clearly wrong. So let's look at statement number 2. X has a nucleon number of 11. This is correct. Nucleon number can also be called mass number. They are the same thing regardless, but one thing you have to note is nucleon number is basically the proton plus the neutron. So we have plus the proton and the 6 neutrons, which is 11, so statement 2 is correct. Statement 3 says X is in group 2 of the periodic table. Now there is no way that we can know that this element is in group 2, so this is not true as well. Question number 4, X is in the second period of the periodic table. Now what does it mean? It is in the second period because we can look at the electrons, number of electrons. Well, if we write the numbers of electrons, which is 5 electrons, into the electronic configuration, we can write it as 2.3. Now you can see that there are 2 shells. So 2 shells mean that you are in the second period. So the number of shells determine the period which the element is in. If you have 2 shells, then you are in the second period. For example, let's say potassium has 2.8.1, 2.8.8.1 is in a 4th shell, so therefore potassium is in the 4th period. Now, so the same principles apply here. So 2 and 4 are the correct. D is the correct answer. Question number 3. Ammonia, NH3, is a covalent molecule. Which diagram shows the outer shell electron arrangement in a molecule of ammonia? The outer shell electron arrangement, meaning that the inner shells of the atoms are not drawn. So we have to know that ammonia, which is made out of nitrogen and hydrogen. Hydrogen is basically 1 electron. Nitrogen has 5 outer electrons. So it's going to make a bond with H. So each H is going to give 1 electron to nitrogen. So they're going to form 3 bonds, 3 bond pairs. So we have to check the answer which is correct. So we know that nitrogen is going to share 3 electrons to each hydrogen so that they can complete into 2 electrons. And so the nitrogen will also complete 8 electrons in the outer shell. Now we just have to count the 8 electrons, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And so the hydrogen also have 2 each. The nitrogen has 8 each. And therefore C is the most likely correct answer. Number 4. Which structure does silicon 4 oxide most closely resemble? Well, you have to know the fact that silicon 4 oxide is actually similar to diamond. Because of the structure they both has a similar tetrahedral structure. So don't get confused by this word tetrahedral. It basically just means a triangular, regular triangle base pyramid. So you don't really have to worry about this word. But you have to remember that diamond and silicon 4 oxide are closely resemble because of their tetrahedral shape. So now B is the correct answer. Question number 5. Substance P conduct electricity when solid. Which particles move in solid P so that it can conduct electricity? Okay. It conducts electricity when solid. Well, this definitely means that it could be a metal. It is definitely a metal. And because a metal is made up of, remember, it's made of metal ions and inside a sea of delocalized electron, which basically means mobile electrons. These mobile electrons are free to move, therefore carrying the charge when a voltage is applied. So 2 and 3 are correct, and therefore C. And therefore D is the correct answer. C is not an correct option. Remember, cations are only positively charged ions. We know that metal ions are still metal atoms, and there are no two different atoms attracting to each other. So we have to say that 3 is the only correct answer. So electrons are the only correct answer. Question number 6. Which equations represent a chemical change? Okay, a chemical change and a physical change, you have to know the difference between those two. A chemical change is when you react two reactants with something to make a product. Now that is a chemical change. However, a physical change is basically a change in state. Change in physical state. Now what do I mean by this? A change in physical state could be from solid to liquid, liquid to gas, or vice versa. Now in here we have to check the state symbols as well. So barium chloride is not changing chemically. However, we can see that it's changing physically because the solid is turning to liquid. Now this is a physical change and not a chemical change. Let's go to option number B. Option number B says calcium ion is aqueous and sulfate ion is aqueous as well. They will form calcium sulfate. This is solid. Now this is a chemical change because two different reactants are reacting together to form a new product. Now this means it is a chemical change. So B is the reasonable answer. Question number 7. Which sample contains the largest number of molecules? Okay. For this question as well, we have to do something called, we have to do something about the number of moles. So we know that, so let's find the MR of the molar mass of CH4, this is 12 plus 4 is 16 grams per mole. Oxygen is 32 grams per mole. Phosphorus is, I believe, phosphorus and R. Phosphorus MR is around 31, so 31 times 4 is around 124, and then 16 dm cube of methane, and CH4, it is also 16 grams per mole. Now we have to find the largest number of molecules, basically find the largest number of mole. Okay, so let's find the largest number of mole. We know that mole formula. Remember, mole is equal to mass over molar mass. So we can say that 16 grams divided by 16 is equal to 1 mole. We know that 16 divided by 32 is equal to 0.5 mole. We know that 16 divided by 124 is equal to 0.13 mole. We know that 16 dm cubed. Remember, however, look at D. D is, we have to find with another formula because it's giving us the volume. So mole is basically volume divided by the molar volume, which is equal to 24 dm cubed at room temperature at RTP, dm cubed per mole. So we can get the mole like this. So 16 dm cubed divided by 24, we are going to get 0.67 mole. So here we can see that A is the correct answer because it has the most mole in them. So A is the correct answer. Now this is actually just a very easy question. Many people, however, find this type of question really difficult. The largest number of molecules is basically asking you the number of moles. So just find the molar mass of each substance, and then find the mole using the mole formula, and then you find the largest number of mole, which is 16 grams of methane. So that is the answer. 7 is correct. Question number 8. The concentration of sample of dilute sodium hydroxide is found by titration. The apparatus used is shown. Which information is needed to calculate the concentration of dilute aqueous sodium hydroxide in mole per dm cube? So we need to calculate the concentration. Concentration, remember, is equal to number of moles over volume. So this is, if you know this equation, you literally just have to find the mole and volume. Now this is a titration type of question. So we want to know the dilute aqueous sodium hydroxide. So for number 8, we have to know the concentration of HCl. We have to know the volume of HCl used. The molar mass of HCl we do not have to know because we are finding the mole. We don't need to find the grams. We just have to know the volume of HCl and the concentration used so that we can find the mole. Remember, mole is equal to concentration times volume, so we can find mole of HCl just by knowing this concentration of HCl and volume of HCl, or hydrochloric acid, which is why we don't need the molar mass of HCl. The volume of sodium hydroxide used, we need to know the volume of sodium hydroxide used as well. We do not need the molar mass of sodium hydroxide because remember, if we find the mole of hydrochloric acid, we can just put a mole ratio with this. We can set up a mole ratio of stoichiometry with sodium hydroxide, and then we can find the moles of sodium hydroxide, and we already know the volume, so we can easily find the concentration of the unknown, which is sodium hydroxide. So therefore B is a reasonable answer. Remember, in titration you do not need to find the molar mass of the substance. Okay, question number 9. In experiment 1, aqueous copper-2 sulfate is electrolyzed using graphite electrodes. In experiment 2, aqueous copper-2 sulfate is electrolyzed using copper electrodes. Which statements identify as a half equation for the reaction at one of the electrodes? Okay, for question number 9, in experiment 1, we are using inert electrodes, in other words, electrodes that are not reactive. In experiment 2, copper electrodes are very reactive, and so they will actually take part in the electrolysis process itself. So that's a good statement number 1. In experiment 1, the half equation for the anode reaction is the following. So remember, you have to know cat, red, and ox. So at the cathode, reduction takes place. At the anode, oxidation takes place. Also remember, oil rig, oxidation is loss of electrons, reduction is gain of electrons. So if you remember these two, it is really easy to make this up. So in experiment 1, at the anode, there should be an oxidation reduction, which means a loss of electrons. And clearly this equation shows a loss of electrons and oxidation. So this is correct. And another way you could do is basically copper-2 sulfate. You can divide them into their former ions, and then you can firstly write down all the ions that are present in the aqueous copper-2 sulfate, and then you have to choose which one will selectively discharge. You could also try the method, or you just can remember the formula cat red and ox or oil rig. If you remember these acronyms, electrolysis becomes really easy. Question number 10. Which substance is not produced during the electrolysis of concentrated aqueous sodium chloride? Let's say concentrated means the chloride ions are going to be really concentrated. They will be selectively discharged over the hydroxyl group or the hydroxide group. So there will be Na plus, H plus, OH minus, Cl minus. So H plus is going to get selectively discharged over the Na, and chloride ions are going to get selectively discharged over the hydroxide group. So we know that after the hydrogen is going to get produced, chlorine gas is going to produce, but then the two ions that are left in a solution is Na plus and OH minus. This is going to form a basic solution of NaOH. The sodium hydroxide is going to form. The only thing that will not form is sodium. Therefore, C is the correct answer. Question number 11. Methane burns in the XX oxygen. The equation is shown. Bond energies are also shown. What is the energy change for the reaction? Remember, for this type of chemical kinetic, you have to remember one formula only, which is delta H. The enthalpy change is basically the bond breaking minus bond making. If you remember this formula, everything will be so much easier. So the bond breaking here actually is really helpful if we draw them out in their display formula. So this is H, 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 H. So we know that there is going to be CH bonds are going to 4 CH bonds are going to get broken down, and then oxygen, there are going to be 2 oxygen atoms. So there are going to be 2 double bond O being broken down. So this is the broken bond energy. That's the bond breaking energy, and then the bond making energy is COO and H2O. So there is going to be 2 CO bonds that are going to be made, that will be produced, and there are going to be 4 OH that's going to be made. The bond energy is going to be produced. So remember, to recap, the CH and O double bond O were going to be broken down, and the OH 4OH group and the CO are going to get produced. So if you write them down like that, so it's going to be 4 times 410 plus 2 times 496 minus 2 times 805 plus 4 times 460. So the bonds that are going to be breaking is going to, you have to minus it with bond making. Therefore, A is the correct answer. It is better, very helpful to write it down. I don't have enough space on the screen, so I can't write it down properly. But yeah, that's how you do it. Question number 12. Which change increases the rate of reaction by decreasing the activation energy? Well, always remember that adding a catalyst will always decrease the activation energy needed, so A is the correct answer. Question number 13. In the contact process, sulfur dioxide, SO2, is reacted with oxygen to produce sulfur trioxide. Which conditions are used in this reaction? Remember to always remember your condition reactions. They are really important, especially in organic parts and the Haber process and the contact process. So the temperature that will be used is 450, the pressure or in kilopascal. Remember, they can either ask you in kilopascal or they can ask you in atmospheric pressure. If you say atmospheric pressure, it is 2 atm, but in kilopascal, it is going to be 200 kilopascal. And the catalyst used will be vanadium 5 oxide, and therefore C is the correct answer. Question number 14. Which reaction is reversible? An iron nail rusting when reacting with moist water. This is not reversible. Limestone reacting with acid to form carbon dioxide. You cannot reverse this reaction. Magnesium burning air to produce white ash, which is magnesium oxide. This cannot be reversed. However, when you add water to anhydrous copper-2 sulfate, it turns blue to hydrated copper-2 sulfate. And this reaction can be reversed if you remove the water by heating the hydrated crystal. Question number 15. The equation for the reaction of sulfur dioxide with acidified potassium dichromate is shown. What is oxidized and what is the oxidation agent? Now, remember oxidation is the increase in oxidation state, and reduction is the decrease in oxidation state. So what is oxidized here? We know that potassium dichromate is potassium dichromate is the oxidizing agent, right? It is an oxidizing agent, but it gets reduced by itself. It oxidizes other ones. Now we see that the SO4 is going to be SO4. There is an increase. There is actually an increase in oxidation state. Because look at this oxygen, there are 2 oxygens, there are 4 oxygens there. And this means that a gain in oxygen means oxidation. And the oxidizing agent, which is the chromium agent, is going to be reduced. So A is the correct answer. Question number 16. What is the definition of strong acid? Well, a strong acid is basically a proton donor that is completely dissociated in aqueous solution. If it completely dissociates in a solution, that means it is a strong acid. If it partially dissociates, this is a weak acid. Okay, we can move on. Question number 17. Which statement about amphoteric oxides is correct? Amphoteric oxides are oxides that have basically the both acidic and basic properties. So they react with both acid and bases. An example, if you just gave them aluminum oxide, you can also give them zinc oxide. And these are some of the examples of amphoteric oxide. Question 18. Copper-2 carbonate is formed when sodium carbonate is added to aqueous copper-2 nitrate. The ionic equation for the reaction is shown. How is pure copper-2 carbonate obtained from the reaction mixture? How is it obtained? Well, we know that the ions are going to react. So this is going to be a solid mixture. A solid mixture means you have to filter them out. You have to filter them out. So filtering is the first step. And then what you do next is you wash these solid materials to get rid of impurities. And then you dry it with sheets of filtering paper or inside an oven. So D is the correct answer. Question number 19. R and Q are elements in the same period of periodic table. Q has 7 electrons in its outer shell and R has 2 electrons in its outer shell. So we know that this is likely going to be an ionic bond. What statement about Q and R is correct? So they are in the same period, meaning they have the same number of shells. So firstly, we can know that they have same number of shell because they are in the same period. Q has 7 electrons in its outer shell and R has 2. So Q is going to form a negative ion of 1 minus and R is going to form 2 plus because it's going to lose 2 electrons in its outer shell. Now which statement about Q and R is correct? Q is a metal and R is a non-metal. This is completely false because we cannot know that. Q and R have different numbers of electron shells. Different numbers of electron shells is wrong because it literally says in the question they are in the same period. R is found right of Q in the periodic table. Now this is false because R is actually a metal. It has 2 electrons, which means R is from group 2. Q has 7 electrons, which means in its outer shell. Therefore, it is in group 7. Now group 7 is the hydrogen group, group 1, group 2 is the metal group. So R is a metal and Q is a non-metal, and metals are found usually in the left side of the periodic table. So this C is wrong. The proton number of R is less than the proton number of Q. This is definitely correct, because since R is in the left side and Q is on the other side, if you increase towards the increasing period, meaning you will increase the proton numbers get increased. And therefore D is the correct answer. So moving on to question number 20. Lead-2 sulfate is an insoluble salt, and which reaction produces a mixture from lead-2 sulfate is obtained by filtration. Remember, to obtain some insoluble salt, you have to use the precipitation method. The precipitation method is basically mixing 2 soluble salts. You're mixing 2 soluble salts to create an insoluble salt. So you have to know your solubility rules as well. So let's look at the options. So we know that lead-2 nitrate is soluble because all nitrates are soluble. If we add this lead-2 nitrate to dilute sulfuric acid, it's going to form lead sulfate and lead sulfate, right? It's going to form lead sulfate. The reason why lead carbonate and dilute sulfuric acid does not work is because it's not going to produce you have to add excess of them. You cannot just add solid, you have to add excess amount of lead-2 carbonate and lead-2 hydroxide. Adding lead to sulfuric acid does not work because lead is really unreactive. So it does not react with the H plus of the sulfuric acid. So C is not an option, and therefore D is the only correct option left. The reason why we don't use precipitation method here is because there is another, they didn't give us the option. But if they have given us the precipitation method, i.e. mixing 2 soluble salts, then you have to choose the option. Question 21. Which statement about alkali metal is correct? Well, lithium is more dense than sodium. This is false. Sodium is more reactive than potassium. This is wrong as well. Sodium has a higher melting point than potassium. This is correct. Because remember one peculiar thing about group 1 iron, group 1 metals is that once you go down the group, the melting or boiling point decreases. It does not increases. So while other groups like the halogens, if you go down the group, the melting boiling point will increase. But for group 1 in particular, the melting point and boiling point will decrease as you go down the group. So sodium has a higher melting point. 22. Which rows describe the properties of a transition element? A transition element is basically between group 1 and group 2 and group 3, group 4, 5, 6, and 7. So basically the middle part of the periodic table. We have to know the properties of it. So we know that they have a very high boiling point or melting point. The density are also very high, and that one thing about them is that they form colored compounds, and therefore B is the correct answer. Question 23. Which rules identify the properties of zinc? Zinc is a transition element. It is also a metal. This means it conducts electricity. It also conducts electricity. It also conducts heat. So it is a good conductivity of heat because it has delocalized electrons. Does it react with dilute acid? It does, because zinc is more reactive than hydrogen in the reactivity series. Therefore 23 is A is the correct answer. Question number 24. Uses of metals depends on their properties. Which property is necessary for the use given? So, use of the metal. We use car bodies. The main reason we use car bodies is that property has to be really hard. So this is not the property or the correct reason why we use the metal. In cutlery, we mainly use cutlery because it is resistant to corrosion. So this is also wrong. For food containers, we use them because of corrosion, and this is the correct reason with the correct use of metal property. Question 25. Which compounds both contribute to acid rain? Remember, acid rain is caused by the sulfur dioxide and the oxide of nitrogens. Remember, oxides of nitrogen and sulfur. So oxide of nitrogen and sulfur dioxide, they will contribute to acid rain. Question 26. P, Q, R, and S are metals. P reacts with dilute hydrochloric acid, forming hydrogen. Q reacts violently with water. R reacts with water to give hydrogen. S is formed by heating its oxide with carbon. Which rows identifies the metal? Now we know that Q reacts violently with water. This means it is highly likely to be a group 1 metal. P reacts with dilute hydrochloric acid, forming hydrogen. This is also fairly reactive. R reacts with water to give hydrogen. Now these are also metals. So S is formed by heating its oxide with carbon. Now this is the least reactive metal. So it could be something like iron, right? It is less reactive than carbon in the reactivity series, so it could be the least reactive. Now, so S could be iron. It could, for Q, it could be sodium. It could be sodium, right? It could also be potassium. The heating with oxide, we have to know the reactivity series. So there's an acronym that I like to use. Please stop calling me a careless zebra. Instead, try learning how copper saves gold. If you remember this reactivity series using this acronym, I guarantee you that these things become really easy. So we know that zinc is actually below carbon as well. Carbon is above zinc, and therefore carbon can actually displace zinc from its oxide. So this is also possible. Now let's look at another possible R could be sodium. Sodium can react with water to give sodium hydroxide and hydrogen. For P, iron is also possible because iron is more reactive than hydrogen in the reactivity series, and therefore D is the correct answer. Question 27. Which compound is formed when iron rusts? When iron rusts, we know that hydrated iron 3 oxide is going to be formed. So D is the correct answer. Question 28. Why is cryolite used in the extraction of aluminum by electrolysis? Cryolite is used so that it can dissolve the aluminum oxide. It dissolves the aluminum oxide. This is the correct one, so A is the correct answer. Question 29. A wax candle is made from a mixture of hydrocarbons. The candle is lit and placed in a gas jar along with a strip of cobalt-2 chloride test. When I say this cobalt-2 chloride, you have to immediately know that it is a water test. After a short time, the oxygen in the jar is used up and the candle flame goes out. Which substance does the cobalt-2 chloride paper identify? Well, it is water because it is a water test, so D is the correct answer. Question 30. The hydrocarbon C4H8 has two structural isomers, but1-ene and but2-ene. Which statement is correct? Now for this, I would like you to draw them out individually. So we know that there's going to be a double bond because it is an alkene. So this is the structure that I have drawn as the but1-ene because the double bond is between the first carbon atom and the second carbon atom, and the second structure would be the double bond should be in the middle. So it would look something like this. So it could be CH, the single bond is going to be CH2, right? CH2, CH, CH2, CH3. This is for the single bond, and for the double bond, it could be CH3, CH, CH, CH3. So if you find them in the options, it is going to be B because butene has a formula CH3, CH, CH, and CH3. And it has the same empirical formula as ethene, so it's correct. 31. Which compounds rapidly decolorizes aqueous bromine? Well, bromine is rapidly decolorized in the presence of an alkene. Alkene meaning it contains a double bond. So it's going to be ending with E and E, and therefore D is the correct answer. Question 32. What are the products of the addition reactions of ethene with bromine and hydrogen? Well, this is basically the addition reaction of alkenes. Basically, for bromine is going to form like this. So it's going to form, the double bond is going to be broken off and going to open on each side, and the the bromine atom is going to get joined with the hydrocarbon atom. So it's going to be CHBr, CH2Br. So it could be A and B. Hydrogen is also the same thing, except instead of Br, the hydrogen takes its place. So it's going to be CH3, CH3, and therefore A is the correct answer. Question 33. Ethanol is manufactured by fermentation and the catalytic addition of steam to ethene. Steam is basically adding water. So which rule describes an advantage of both methods? So the advantage of fermentation is that it is renewable. The resources are renewable, and thus it is an advantage. But if you make the alcohol from ethene, the ethanol produced is very pure, and therefore D is the correct answer. 31. Methanoic acid and propane 1-ol react to form an ester. What is the structural formula of the ester? Now, methanoic acid and propanol, it is acid reacting with an alcohol. A carboxylic acid reacts with an alcohol. We know that this is going to produce an ester. So it's going to produce something. So we take the alcohol group. So it's propyl, and then this is for the acid we write methanoate with an OATE. This is its suffix, and the propyl group we take it from the alcohol. So it's going to produce an ester called propyl methanoate. So how do we draw this structure? Well, when we draw the structure, we usually draw the negative part first. So the methanoate, the acid part of the group first. So we draw HCOO. Now this is going to get joined with a propyl group, which is CH2, and CH3. So if we write the ambiguous description of the structural formula, it's going to be HCOO, CH2, CH2, CH3. So A is the correct answer. Moving on to question number 35. What is the correct structure of PET? Remember, PET is polymer, right? A PET is basically basically terylene, right? Terylene. You can call it terylene as well. It's basically a polyester. So it's going to have the COO group linkage with them. So it's going to have an ester linkage. We find the ester linkage here, right? It's made out of two different monomers. It is condensation polymerization. So B is the correct answer. It is not D because remember, although there are ester linkages, look at this. This is not an ester linkage, and therefore D is not correct. A and C have amide linkages, which are not correct, so B is the correct answer. Question 36. Alkanes undergo substitution reactions in the presence of UV light. Which equation represents a substitution reaction of ethane? Now, ethane, we have to know that ethane is an alkane. An alkane will undergo substitution reactions under the presence of UV light, and if you add chlorine to them, they are going to, one hydrogen atom is going to be gone and one chloride ion is going to go into the molecule. So basically it is substituting the H hydrogen atom with the chlorine atom. So this is going to be CH2Cl, CH2H5Cl, C2H5Cl, and then it's going to produce HCl as a side product because this HCl and another chlorine atom are going to react, and this forms an HCl molecule. So B is the correct answer for 36. 37. Methane reacts with chlorine in different substitution reactions. How many different products containing a single carbon atom can be made during the reaction? Now methane, remember, is CH4, and when you add it with chlorine, the chlorine atom can be substituted with H, another chlorine atom can be substituted with H, another can be substituted with H, another can be substituted with H. So there can be 4 different substitutions. In other words, all of the hydrogen atoms can be theoretically be substituted with the chlorine atom. Therefore, C is the correct answer. Question 38. Rock salt is a mixture of salt and sand. The mixture used to separate the salt from sand is listed. Okay, how do we separate this mixture of salt and sand? So we can add water to it, right? And we can separate the salt, and we can separate the sand. So how do we separate the salt? We can add water, make the salt dissolve in the water, and then we can heat it, give it heat so that the salt will evaporate, leaving only salt. But however, it is better to dissolve salt in water, and then we will filter the funnel to filter the sand out, and then we'll evaporate to get the salt that will remain on the petri dish. So which statement about the method is correct? To filtrate in step 2 is pure water. It's not pure water because the salt is dissolved in water. So it is not pure, it is impure. The residue in step 2 is pure crystal salt. Remember, this is wrong because residue meaning the one that you filtered out, which is the sand. So that's also wrong. The solvent is a mixture of salt and water. This is also wrong because the solvent is not a mixture of salt and water, because we already removed the sand and we want to remove sand and salt separately, right? So the solute is a salt, which is rock salt. It is a solute, so C is the correct answer. 39. Two compounds M and N are dissolved in water and separated by chromatography. The results are shown. What is the R value of M, and which compound is most soluble in water? Now this is paper chromatography, and you have to find the RF value. So remember the RF value formula. The RF value formula is basically the distance traveled by substance over the distance traveled by the solvent. So we have to basically just divide it. So we have to know the value, R value of M, which is 2 divided by 10. It is equal to 0.2. The R value of M is 0.2. The most soluble compound will always go further out of the sheet, so it will be closer to the solvent front, or the distance that the solvent traveled. It will be closer, it will travel further in the sheet because it is more soluble. And if you think about it logically, it really makes sense because the further it goes, the more soluble it is. And M is not really that soluble, and so N is the most soluble compound. This is not as soluble because it does not travel as far as it can. It stops at 2 centimeters. So B is the correct answer for question number 39. Question number 40. When acid is added to a salt, a gas is produced which turns lime water milky. Now this gas is carbon dioxide. When sodium hydroxide is added to salt X, a gas is produced which turns litmus paper blue, and this is ammonia. Ammonia gas is basic and it turns the litmus paper blue. Now what is X? So ammonia is being produced. Now this could only mean the presence of ammonium ion, there's ammonium ion, and carbon dioxide is produced because of the carbonate ion CO2 minus, CO3 2 minus. So if we write the formula out, it will be NH4, the whole NH4 twice, CO3. Now this is the compound that is present, so B is the correct answer. Okay. They also gave you the periodic table if you need it. This year, I will say it is particularly tricky, but also at the same time, it's not that difficult if you know the core concepts. Anyways, thank you for watching these videos. If you have any doubt, leave them at the comments below. I would love to explain further if you didn't get them. Otherwise, have a nice day, or you could check out more videos that I will be posting soon. So, until I see you next time,